8 in the morning, August 8th, at 8 in the morning. I love that, triple eights. Let's make those lucky numbers, right?
Let's go with 808, you can make a quadruple.
Okay, let's wait 5 minutes. No.
Chairman Soto, we have Judge Perry here
I think-
on behalf of Mr. Krippenbacher. And while our Rutledge and Houstonian folks could not be with us this morning because of the change in the date, they did provide some information for the board to review. I sent some of it to you last Friday, and then Jim Hamilton sent me some additional information about budget forecasts for the coming year. Basically, it's just bad.
Define bad.
Currently, the current level of expenditure in the state is already exceeds what they have projected as far as revenue. In addition, they use some non-recurring revenue to settle the budget this year. That is already obligated to recurring projects for the coming year based on some of the legislative actions that were taken. So his recommendation to the board and to us as a school district as we're planning for our budget for the coming year is to be very, very conservative and fiscally responsible, as we always are, in working toward that balanced budget, but don't anticipate a lot of extra money for kids.
So that's from Jim.
That's from Jim Hamilton.
All right,
And then
so-
Jessica prepared the summary that just kind of gives you an update about what happened, what the schedule is for the upcoming piece, and some of the things that they expect.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Go for it.
Okay, I guess I got a real simple question. I mean, we know what our needs are. There's no gray area. There's no point fighting a losing battle either. So the question I've got, Mike, is what battles can we win?
Okay, so I would go with 3. So there's 3 things I would put on your list, and 3 things I think you got a shot at. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
We also need to talk about both as a board, your legislative priorities, and then also what we would want to take to OLA for the legislative effort that we would work on
Okay.
comprehensively.
Well, let's first.
Yeah.
See what
I
Mike.
apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to make sure
It's okay.
there's
No,
like
no, no.
two. One is probably more comprehensive. Typically with OLA, we tend to focus on a single issue.
No, I appreciate the context.
Yeah, and this will probably speak about this. First of all, is the thing we've been working on for, this will be the 3rd year, if we go forward, which is high growth language.
Okay.
So, very quickly, as you know, we worked on this 2 years ago. We got $4 million in the budget. We worked on it last year. We got language and $3 million in the budget. The language stuck. The governor vetoed our $3 million.
So what does the language translate into in dollars next year?
It depends on how much money they appropriate. There's a formula, and then you would fund that formula. And so next year, depending on, and I need to rely on Sarah because it's a formula, and more people might get in the formula next year. So it depends on how much money we get funded in next year.
Number one, is the formula accurate?
Well, the formula kind of speaks to itself. What we asked, part of the strategy that we did last year is, as you remember, year before last, we just got money for Osceola. We wanted to do a formula, but the Senate staff was skeptical. They didn't like our high growth language that we were trying to amend. So we went to them this year and said, with the support of the appropriations chair, so we went.
Who's the chair?
Jack Latval.
Okay.
So Jack went and said, hey, work with these guys, sat down with his staff, said, you need to work with these guys. So Sarah, myself, Doug Bruce, we went and met with staff, outlined our problem, and we let them develop the formula. And
Is Jack still the chair?
he is the chair, for 1 more year.
Okay.
So we let them develop the formula so they would feel good about it. They put together the formula, and they thought, and Sarah can bet, when we were talking to them, I think they thought we were full of it when we were saying Osceola was unique. And once they created this formula and they started working, they said, wait a second, Osceola does have a legitimate issue. So we put together this formula. Hopefully we don't fall out of our formula. That would be good news because it means we're doing better, but it's also bad news in terms of getting that money. But anyway, so we got the formula in 7069. However, if 7069 through a lawsuit gets tossed out, depending on if they toss out the whole thing or just pieces, we could lose that language. But let's just assume we keep the language. So next year, we would want to fund that pot. This year, they funded the pot at $3 million. The Senate had it funded in the budget in a really good spot. When the House during conference got a hold of it, they picked up the money, but they said we want to move the location of where the $3 million was, and we got in a very bad spot.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
The $3 million.
Mm-hmm.
Was that as a result specifically of the formula, or they saw the formula, came up with a number, the number was wrong, and they just threw 3 million in?
No, if you wanted to fully fund it, it'd be tens and tens of millions.
Okay,
The money was basically what Jack thought he would squeeze out
Okay,
for
so
this
the
session.
formula was in there, but this money was not necessarily equal to the formula?
No. You
Okay,
would,
okay.
to make everybody whole would take a
That's
lot.
what I
To make
thought.
us whole
It
would
was like
take 10
15
million.
million for us or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, so
Okay, I just
so,
wanted-
so it would, so the money was unfortunately put in a spot, if I showed you in the budget, it was just nasty where it was at. It looked like a turkey, and unfortunately, the governor elected to veto it. So this year, we have a commitment from Chair Latvala to fund the formula again. If 7069, if that language goes away, I think he would try and put the language back in. So I think, first off, we want to keep pursuing that. We've been chopping at that tree. I think we want to continue. And now that we have this language in, really, this is a long-term deal we want to pursue. The language is in, and we keep qualifying. You fund it, hopefully next year under Jack. The following 2 years, when Mike LaRosa is at the top of his class, he'll be a senior, he'll probably be in leadership, then we'll probably rely on him to help put money in for it. And so, this, if we get the formula and we start the money every year, there's some money in that pot and becomes something they're used to, that can be a source of funds. It's not gonna solve every problem, but that could be a long-term source of money for us. So I think that's something we'd be foolish not to continue to pursue, just because we put a lot of work into it. And
But it sounds like the formula's a little bit arbitrary, because every year they're gonna come up with a number, and the number is going to be 3, 4, 5 times what they may have the appetite or the stomach to actually fund. So, I mean, which is better than not having the formula, I understand that, but it almost becomes, okay, every year the formula is $15, $20 million, we're gonna give you $2 million.
But the
So-
formula's not arbitrary, it's the appropriations process.
Right.
So here's what you ideally want to do, and I'm not saying we're going to accomplish this. Here's what you want to do: you want to work your way in and
Chip away.
and chip away, and you raise the money every year. You get there, and then when let's say you get lucky enough that the right person is in the right position at the right time, and then they come in. Let's say Mike LaRosa is in just the right spot. 2 years from now, speaker needs him something, and he comes through like a champ, whatever that thing is, and he goes, you know what? Let's just make it 10 million recurring, and it goes, and then it's 10 million forever. After that, we're just adding new money on top. Those things don't happen right away, particularly when I'm telling this group, our delegation isn't necessarily the most powerful in the state. So, but when you never know what might happen. And when you get the guy in the right spot at the right time, then you try and capitalize on it. So
Mike.
that would be one. I got 2 more. So yes.
3 areas of concern. Number 1 is the language being affected. The only chance of that is the 7069 lawsuit. Otherwise, we're in the books. That's
We're in the
done.
books.
We're
It's
good.
in statute.
Yep.
Yes.
The formula and us falling out of the formula you alluded to. The main risk there is just if our growth patterns do not continue, correct? Or is there another,
Right, so-
is there another benchmark that I'm not thinking of?
Sarah may have to help me on this. So there's 5 elements to the formula. You're levying the full discretionary capital improvement millage, 1.5 mils. Capital outlay average growth over the most recent 5 years period is equal or exceed twice the state average, or 1%, whichever is greater. 3, must have more than 24,000 COFTI. Funds from discretionary capital improvement millage per COFTI must be less than the statewide average. And 5, must have voted a half-penny sale surtax for school construction or participate in local government infrastructure surtax.
So growth is our only real threat in there.
So if we stop growing, then we would fall out of the formula, which
Right.
would only be fair.
Right. And I ask because I just want to make sure that we're clear about where the threats do or don't lie, where the challenges are. The other thing is there's nothing aside from what you said with a reoccurring appropriation. There's nothing that's going to ever eliminate the risk of not getting this formula funded year by year. The language is in, but at any point in time, it's a line item, and the governor at any point could say, number 1, it could just be up for debate within conference. Number 2, the governor at any point in time just say no.
Absolutely. Like now, like I said, in state government world, the gold ring is getting recurring dollars.
Right.
And so if at and 1 year when we had the old formula, we flew a little too high, too close to the sun with OLA, and that we had like 20 million recurring or some pretty big chunk we were putting into that formula, and the governor vetoed it. We got it through the legislature, and so, yeah, you can pop out recurring funds. I mean, it's not impossible, but once you get that in there for a year or two, you're pretty solid. But yeah, it's always a threat.
Okay. Last question on that then is there a target that we're going after this cycle from a funding perspective? If we started thinking about that number, we talked about 4 a couple of years ago, we talked about 3 last cycle.
I would really think 3 to 5 is probably what I would expect. Right now we're trying to get the camel's nose under the tent. So we're not going to go in and ask for big money. Now, if an opportunity strikes, last year, Dr. Pace will tell you, and Sarah, when we went up there, what we went in saying was, don't expect to get any money. We were trying to get language, and if we got a couple bucks, that's just gravy. So we hit with a target opportunity and put some money in. Who knows what happens if we get into the right part of the process and we can get more. Heck yeah, we're going to try. But I think, Latval will probably laugh me out of the office if I go, hey, I'd like $15 million. He'll go, we'll take this and let's see where it goes.
So I said last question, but maybe this will be the last question. With the threat of a lawsuit for 7069, whether it stands or it doesn't stand, if 7069 is overturned, is there any chance that our language stands, or because it's looped into that? And maybe this is a Perry question, but can those things be separated out, or is no matter what, we're linked and tied to the fate of that?
It depends on the way they, quote, prevail in the lawsuit. If the lawsuit wins because the process was wrong, they did it through a conforming bill and they said that's out of range, they threw out the whole thing, we're out.
Right.
If they go, we just don't like this language where
Right.
you're giving money to charter schools, that's unconstitutional, that's improper, then our language would stay. So it depends. In most bills, there's language. Perry, you could probably tell me there's language up front that says, it's severable. That every provision in this bill is severable. It's not. And I'm sure 7069 did the same thing.
What the first thing they do is look and see if they can sever out the portions that violate the law, the Constitution. If they're able to do that, then that which does not violate would remain,
Right.
and they can move forward.
Okay, good.
But that's open to interpretation also.
Thank you, I'm good on that.
Everything dealing with the law, Mr. Will, is open to interpretation, and it will depend on the 7 justices that are there at that time. But generally, they will try, and the law says that if they can sever out the illegal provisions, they'll do that. That's the first thing on their pecking order to do.
Doesn't somebody then come in backwards and say, no, this isn't illegal because of, because then somebody got married to that language. And I'm not suggesting it always happens, but I could see that too.
Yeah, it could happen, but generally, the courts will look and see what can stand on its own.
Okay.
And if it can, that will survive.
Okay.
And so, to finish the answer to your question, Jay, the other 2 things to consider, and I wish Clarence was here because with his involvement with the School Board Association, are team-up issues. One is, I think y'all have talked about, Senator Huckel is working on revisiting the DCD formula. She got approval from the Senate President to study that. She's chaired the Education Committee. That's a good thing. She was not available all last session because she was having her cancer treated. The word is she's going to be back next session. Dorothy's a good friend of mine. We work together on half a dozen committees and we're buddies. So we can work on that. What I would suggest is sort of teaming up. That's not a Osceola go it alone. That's one where we want to, Volusia is kind of the tip of the spear. We want to get with them and some of these other districts that are really negatively impacted by DCD and have kind of a coalition, all of us pushing that direction. Those of you that were there when we were visiting with Chair Latvala, we discussed that with him at that meeting. He was open to it.
Right.
But once again, it's tough because anytime there's issues where there's winners and losers, and that's one of those, the losers don't like it. You know, our high growth thing, there's no losers, there's just winners, us. That doesn't, but when there's losers, that makes it tough. So, but I think that's a team we want to
So Mike, you
get
do
on.
believe that's a viable, I mean, we had this discussion with Chairman, I think it's Johnson, is it Melody Johnson, was here from Volusia. I think, I was ready to get on board, but I think, I stopped and said, hey, let's talk to you, let's talk to our lobbying team and see if that's a viable thing to go after.
It is, but it's one of those things that's kind of, that can oftentimes be a journey of 100 miles.
Sure.
In that we may not get it next year, but Dorothy, assuming her health holds up, she's got another, 6 years in the Senate. She can keep chipping away at that, and the right time comes with the right president, the right speaker. It may not be next year, but there may come a time where there's something that needs to be traded, and they go, okay, we want to fix this. One of the districts that would be hurt is Miami-Dade. Their delegation, you want to catch them when their delegation maybe isn't at its peak. So next cycle would be a time when their delegation wouldn't be necessarily at its peak. So that would be that's when it might happen. But I think we want to get on that team. There's no reason not to, and there's some opportunities for recurring
Good.
savings, and so that would be. But that's a team up issue that. And it wouldn't, Dr. Pace, to your point, it wouldn't be an Olay issue.
No, not Olay.
Because it would be an issue you'd have me and Doug working on. But for Olay, high growth would be this thing. And then,
Sarah, what's the math on the DCD? Like if it were whole, what would be the difference, do you know?
Osceola is losing 4.7 million this year.
Okay, thank you.
and what you want to expect is if you fix the formula, you're not going to recoup 4.7 million, but if you could get half that every year, that'd be nice.
Nothing, right. So what's number
What,
three?
wait a minute. You can't eliminate the formula and then it kind of
They're
levels
not
back
going to
out?
eliminate. I would be shocked
You
if
don't
they
think they'll
eliminate the formula.
at
I think they'll
all
restructure the formula. They will.
So part of it is the methodology that the formula is derived by, including home values and all those other factors that I think Mr. Thacker made a good point, maybe at our last school board meeting, that they're factoring in some of the more affluent communities and thus moving up the median or average home price in these areas, that's really what's driving the DCD.
Right. There's so you make it more equitable, but I don't think you get rid of it. I'd be shocked if you just eliminate it. But
So
listen,
I
I would be shocked at what they did in 70-69.
Sure.
Was pretty bold in the if you get a speaker from Volusia County and that, which who knows, but
So what's number three?
number three would be when they go back and look at 70-69, doing something to cap the amount of dollars that go to charter schools. The districts, we team up with the districts that have been good actors. Who are those districts that, that we've been welcoming charter schools and we're the ones getting
Can we get
crooked
Broward
buckets?
or Palm Beach and Dade on board with that?
Well, that would once again, that's a team up issue.
That's something they could team up with.
Well, and not all of those districts are going to be as impacted even as we are because of their debt structure. For example, Pasco County is not going to have to give any of their capital dollars to charter schools because their debt is high.
Okay.
Pinellas County has low debt, and they're going to be giving some of the most in terms of capital dollars. So we're going to have to really look formulaically at who actually ends up getting impacted by that piece to decide who we want to team up
I've
with.
got a
So
question.
that was part of the research. That's part of the research I wanted to do too. So you're saying that if you're a fiscally sound district, you've made prudent financial decisions and haven't over-leveraged yourself, and you've been friendly to choice options in education within your community, you're more adversely
We're going to get
affected
hammered.
You're hooked.
than
Yes.
someone who has said no to charters and has borrowed until they're.
That's exactly right. I think that's why Miami-Dade hasn't, I would just guess that that's why they haven't really jumped on 70-69 yet, because their debt is high. So I don't know what they're gonna actually lose. We haven't
I've got-
gotten all those calculations yet.
I wanna
but
get- I
That's a
want-
big piece of this that people don't
I need
realize.
to ask you an educational question relative to what we want to accomplish. I've brought this up before, I know privately, I think to a certain extent publicly. Are we still, Osceola, and then we'll talk about the state, are we still having a difficult time finding good physics, calculus, chemistry, HVAC, electrician instructors? Are we having a difficult time still finding good people?
Absolutely. And so if the board would allow, I'd like to suggest a couple of things for us to consider. Again, not for Olay.
Can we
as
just
our
talk
primary-
about the
Yep.
capital, charter capital number one, just for a minute?
I want to go back to that after you get done with that.
So, Mike, I mean, your suggestion is, I don't think I've been vocal, but I can now. I mean, I just disagree with that whole piece at all. Just giving any kind of, funds and the capital funds to private companies that are gonna build buildings with public money that then the public doesn't own. I think that's I've got a huge problem with that. So what you're talking about is actually moving towards a cap instead of actually coming and saying, well, we're against that provision of 7069 at all.
Well, being against that provision, and by the time we get next session, that provision of law is what it would be.
Sure.
Is kind of a non-starter. We're not
Okay.
going to get that popped out. Instead, what I would go through, and I would give the exact speech that Tim just gave. So you'd go sit down with Senator Simmons and you'd give that speech. So the districts that were prudent, I won't repeat it, that did that.
You would never be able to say it as good as I said it.
So so let's fix that. Let's make that less egregious. And so it may be one of those things where, you know what, we're going to set a cap of 10%. Now that's not the greatest one of all time. When you're giving up 20%, 10% is a nice savings. So if you and I'm just doing that 10% cap.
I understand.
That doesn't have any. No one in the legislature is talking about it, but you come up with a remedy, or maybe just like there's this debt remedy. Once you get in there and you start working on it, they go, well, once again, we're small, and it may be. I'm talking about teaming up. When we get down to it, who knows that you don't put something that says, if you qualify for the high growth formula, you don't have to give any money to charter schools.
There
You're
you go.
exempt from that.
See, now you're working.
Okay.
That's
So
what I'm
not-
talking about.
But I'm not saying we can
I
get
know,
that.
I
But,
know.
I'm saying- but that would be an item that I would work that I would put on your list, is addressing that provision.
But I
wouldn't-
guess my point is, Mike, is that if all these districts are gonna team up against 7069 and join this lawsuit, for us to just come out against that provision, I guess what I'm saying is, are we kind of directing what we want to work on versus what we take a stance against, or?
If I could just, didn't the Senate, particularly Senator Simmons, have some original language in that charter capital sharing piece that talked about restricting for-profit companies that they proposed
I
and
don't
couldn't
know.
get through?
I think so.
I
don't know.
believe that Senator Simmons was a proponent of some sharing of the capital dollars, but for the folks like New Dimensions, who are not the for-profit companies. And what we're hearing and what Jessica and Jim have shared is that they anticipate there will be some effort from like a Senator Simmons to fix some of these pieces of 7069. Whether it's like Mike suggested, a cap on how much of your capital you have to share if you've been charter friendly or something like that, or where we go back into the language and say only certain charter schools could qualify.
But Mike, your
And then-
belief is that we can't just, there's not gonna be enough steam and enough school districts there to be able to pull that whole, to kind of.
School districts don't matter. I mean, if you had every school district screaming at the top of their lungs they wanted it out,
No, sure.
Rich Corcoran ain't gonna, that was his crown jewel, so he's not gonna
I
let
mean,
that
and not
go
just
away.
7069, but that provision of
Yeah,
7069.
I think that,
Okay.
the reason they did it the way they did, and I won't recap unless
Sure,
you ask me to,
no.
the way they did it, but it was designed so that it didn't have to go through a process, because you could never get that through, and that was, when I say, Richard, there's a cadre of very pro-charter
Sure,
individuals
sure.
that this was the only
I
way
would
they
consider
get through.
myself pro-charter.
And once they get it, now that they've got it in, they will not allow that to come out. But we can, team up to help modify it so that it's fair, so we're not hurt, and look for targets of opportunity where, hey, maybe there's something we can carve out just for us.
Sure.
Because
Okay.
we're so unique.
Just so everyone, I've had a similar conversation every year, is I'm all for taking a stand philosophically where we need to and we believe that we should, but we've got to be smart and strategic as we know about the fights that we get into. And if we go after something that we know we're never going to win and it's only going to undermine the efforts that we know that we can chip away at, so it's a foolhardy approach in my opinion. So I just think we need to make sure we're balancing
Well, that
all
was the
of that
reason
out.
for my line of question.
Right.
And I think that
I'm
if
just
you-
saying, it's as a
I
whole,
understand.
there's so many moving parts here, and even with the Simmons language, I'm not, there's more homework I need to do admittedly, but I'm not convinced that changes. There's a reason it didn't make it through round one.
I think Mike is basically saying he would agree.
Yeah. So the DCD, fine, I agree with it because I think there's a philosophical piece with it. I think there's a mechanical piece, and I think there's a potential pathway. 70-69 is a big hairy beast, and how we go about addressing elements of that, we're not going to win. To your point, we're not going to win the philosophical conversation because it is an important component of the Speaker of the House. So going in and banging on the table saying this one's terrible, it adversely affects us isn't the right way to do it. We've got to use a scalpel through all of these pieces and carve out the little tiny parts that make the most sense for districts like us. That's all.
So those three are my answer to your question.
Okay, so now let me go back to where I was going with Dr. Pace. So we have a difficult time finding STEM and STEAM, or whichever, are the big buzzwords everywhere with education these days. We all know that. So relative to that, though, one of the issues we have is that because of the way we have negotiated or we have to pay teachers, it's difficult to find those calculus, physics, chemistry, HVAC, electrician instructors, et cetera, and the ones that are available you may not necessarily want. So, and I know wages are a negotiated issue, so the question I've got is there a way that the state can somehow, and Judge, I guess this is as much a question for you as it is for anybody else, that we can get legal cover for differentiated pay based on supply and demand? I mean,
The cover's there. The statutory language for differentiated pay based on critical shortage areas is there.
okay.
We just have to decide how much of our salary allocation you would want to allot to that as a board and then negotiate the contract.
So that's not a lobbying issue then? At this
No.
point? Okay.
It's a negotiated issue.
Okay, so there's nothing we need from the state relative to that, though? Okay.
If you want to talk about a team-up issue potentially with other districts that I think would help our teacher shortage issue,
Yes.
would be some changes to certification statutory language. For example, we've talked to you as a board about the general knowledge exam and how currently, while teachers are granted a 3-year temporary contract, they only have 1 year to pass that test. So even if the kindergarten teacher doesn't pass the math portion of the test, which highly leverages up to Algebra 2, which they should know, but it's been a long time perhaps since they've taken it,
Right.
they're out. 60 teachers we had to non-renew who were effective or highly effective last May because of the general knowledge
So
exam.
what's the fix, 2 years to pass it?
Give them the length of their temporary certificate.
See, that's your point, that's something.
Still have to pass it,
No.
but give them the length of their
But you
temporary
get,
certificate.
that's something everybody wins, every district in the state does, and it doesn't cost the state any more money.
The second piece of that certification piece that I would like to consider, again, this is not an LA issue, and this
No,
isn't
no, no,
necessarily
no,
yours,
it's
but something that I
important.
think we could team up
It's
on
important.
with the certification piece is, where was I going with this? General knowledge, Oh.
Concordant scores.
concordant scores. If they can earn the best and brightest for an ACT, thank you, John, or an SAT score, why couldn't that count for the general knowledge exam? You know, they took it when they were in high school, they've proven that they have those skills,
I don't think they could wrap their brain around that in Tallahassee. I understand what you're saying.
but they're already using it as a
I
criteria for
understand that.
something
You-
else. So I think it would be kind of an easy
I
win.
think that
Because
the-
currently, I could have taught for 10 years in New York. We have certificate reciprocity. But I still have to take the general knowledge exam.
Okay, there's two issues. Number one, the first issue is we need an extra year for teachers to pass that general knowledge exam. Is that the first thing, the first issue?
I would give them the length of their temporary certificate.
You're saying 3.
They're 3 years.
3 years, okay, so so that's something I think we could all win, and there's not one district in the state that would fight that. Everybody could be on board with that, it doesn't cost state any money. That's not to discount any of your priorities, Mike, but I'm a big fan of fighting winning battles. And this sounds like something we can get across the finish line.
Sure.
What's the adverse argument? to
Yeah,
this?
that's what I was gonna tell. Who's against this change?
DOE,
Test company.
or the testing company.
Yeah, the test company and the commissioner.
Let's find out who the testing company is.
I mean,
Pearson.
otherwise,
it?
nobody else is.
Pearson, oh, well, I'm Pearson, I'm Pearson's.
Hasn't part of the
favorite.
argument been, though, that by eliminating that 1-year threshold, that somehow we're lowering the bar for who we want teaching in our classrooms? Isn't that the argument that's on the street?
Potentially,
But there's a shortage
We
of
did that a
teachers.
long time ago.
But it's reality of numbers though.
right.
It's a shortage of
But that's
teachers.
why, too,
No, I
I think you
understand
could
that, but I wanna
advocate
understand
for,
both sides of
I
it.
think you could advocate for the SAT or the ACT.
Dr. Is this language, is there language that would address this, and has it been floated and shot down, or you know where it stands?
Not yet. We've just had conversations as superintendents with Commissioner Stewart at our
Yeah, I
meetings
mean,
It's
I-
not
about
something
it.
Commissioner Stewart can just say, it would have to be
No.
passed as a law.
State board.
Okay.
Well, she might be able to, but she won't.
Is it a rule or a law?
I believe it's in statute.
It's both.
And then the State
Statute.
Board of Education
Yeah.
is a piece of it.
Yeah,
So,
there's a statute and then there's a
Okay.
rule, a
So
state
there
board
is a
rule to
statute.
implement the statute.
so who do we know who's friendly, who wants to have a win?
What do you mean?
That's the legislator.
I think you're gonna see this coming from other districts in certain ways. It's just nobody's really kind of provided the language. But, you know, I think we're all dealing with the same issue.
Let's provide the language, that way somebody can run with it.
The other piece that I wondered if the board would want to consider as a part of potentially even our OLA.
Deb, I'm
Objective.
sorry, let me just ask this before you go on. First of all, I'm not 100% sure I'm on board yet. Conceptually, I get it. I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, though. Are you saying that part of our approach, if the board agreed to that, would be to extend the 3-year or to use the concordance score? Or both?
We would advocate for both.
Either or, yeah.
Okay.
But if you're not a fan of that, obviously it's
Well,
the
I'm not
board's
saying
priorities.
I'm not, I
but-
just want to think it through a little bit, because there is another
I
side
think
to
the
this
state would, I
conversation.
think.
Right or wrong, there is.
I agree.
Giving the state vanilla or chocolate to pick from is not a bad thing.
I don't know if I'm necessarily on board for it, because I think it basically, you throw in the towel as saying, if we're going to, in teaching, trying to say this in the right way, in a higher level, not really in society, not respect teachers the way we should, if we're gonna, and that's shown because we have 20 to 25% reduction in our College of Educations here in the state of Florida. So we're just throwing in the towel and saying, well, we will lower our standards to fill up the positions. And I don't know if that's necessarily ultimately a winning
I
strategy.
appreciate the intellectual and the philosophical.
I know, it's philosophical.
background. But Ricky, and I'm not gonna tell you that there's not some validity to what you said, but it's a question of the
No, there
reality.
is validity.
No,
to
but
this.
there's a question of the reality of the numbers, though. If we've got
I get that.
No, there's a shortage of teachers. If there wasn't a shortage of teachers, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
And if the board is reluctant to
Yep.
consider the raising the bar, or lowering the bar piece by
Okay, so
extending the
lowering
the-
time
But Jay,
to
let's
pass the general knowledge test.
Look why there is a
Why
shortage of
wouldn't
teachers.
an SAT or an ACT
I know, that's a good point.
at a college-ready score
Yep.
show the same thing? And right now, what we're doing is we're putting more and more hoops in the way of getting and keeping people in the profession. I mean, this is a national issue, because it's not just that you can't find teachers, it's that they walk out the door, because they're done with having to play all these games. Now, the general knowledge test is $200. If you have to retake a section, every time you have to retake a section, that price goes up. When you start talking about wage issues, we can't necessarily give teachers more money, we don't have it in our budget, but these are things that, as a college kid, you know, or somebody right out of college is trying to get their foot in the door, is having to face all these different fees as well.
Is the general knowledge exam that egregious that it is really an intellectual impediment to people being able to enter this profession?
They changed the test. I haven't seen the test, and the other problem that we have is that right now, there aren't even materials provided by the
To study for the
state
test.
to study for the test.
Here's some rigs
So
in
we're
every
kind
test
of
they do.
guessing as to what's on the test.
Pearson.
I just want to understand some of those pieces of it before I agree that it's a direction we can go. And I understand it's serving as a barrier. I understand your point about 60 teachers being non-renewed as a result of it. I understand the the thought of saying align it with the temporary certificate, and I understand the shortage piece that you talk about, but I'm also, I think I'm more in line with Ricky on this, that I do have some concerns, and I do have concerns about what message it sends to the caliber that we, not just we, but we education are looking for those that are entering the profession, particularly the profession of encouraging kids to be able to learn, gain competency, be able to pass exams. So, and I know that's not all they exist for, but let's be honest, we give tests all the time. So,
I got a question.
And I'm not,
I think
just
you
for a
can
second.
help educate me quite a bit on this, and I look.
I got a Pearson question.
I'm not gonna stand against it 100%, I'm just saying that's kind of
Wait.
my first take on it.
You need to hear this. Pearson develops a test, they administer the test. Does Pearson, in the event that teachers don't do well, does Pearson then have backfill themselves with the remediation material for the test after somebody doesn't do well?
Not currently.
So there is no remediation material coming on the back end, okay?
We've, as you know, we've been providing our own certification tests, prep kinds of courses, doing the best that we can with what we know in terms of what we think is
So
on
Pearson's
it.
just the testing agent?
Just the
Let
testing
me,
agent.
Okay.
let me interject real quick. Just to think about, there's something that we can do here, right? Before we go off and where we have absolutely no control. From what I understand, this is a question for Mr. Boyd. The purpose of this test, is this for, because you just said that we had highly effective and elective teachers, right? That we could not renew because they did not pass this general knowledge test, correct?
That, or they failed to take it in the time that they should have taken it for whatever reason.
All right. Okay, so that,
Procrastination.
well, all right, well, for those, we need to find out what happened with those, because that's not acceptable,
No.
Right.
okay? All right, now let's talk about those that are good teachers, but couldn't pass the test, all right? So that means they didn't get certified, so that's it, they can't continue, right? All right. And you're saying is that we could probably help without going into the rules or going into the place where we have no power or control. But you said if we had materials to prepare teachers, that would help us.
Yes.
Problem is that we have these tests that you don't have guides, there's not a Kaplan out there that we can even contract with to help us, right?
Now, we're in conversation now with UCF that's been offering a course. They're typically full, but they're willing to potentially offer one here based on what they know. And we're also in conversation with another company. But as of right now, we don't have any good resources.
All right, so that's the best we have right now, the UCF course, correct? Okay,
And we're going to try to get a cohort here to help them.
okay, and that's already in the plans?
Yes.
All right. Okay,
A
that
quick
was it.
comment.
Guys, go at it again.
There's been quite an evolution over time of the requirements. Back many years ago, the general knowledge was a choice, the class test was a choice, the praxis was a choice. So we had some options to work from. And I don't know why we made the shift to just general knowledge only. I can speculate that we had quite a number of applicants for positions. We could, I guess, raise the bar a little bit. Ironically, we have 60 classrooms today that are not going to have a certified teacher in front of them. So we have 60 vacancies, and we told 60 teachers goodbye because of the general knowledge test. Teachers that principals wanted to retain, they wanted to keep on board. So we're not asking to eliminate this requirement. We're asking to have some flexibility in the requirement. I still think the class test, the praxis test, the ACT, other concordant types of scores can still prove competency for a teacher. But we've pigeonholed ourselves into this one thing, which really has caused quite a bit of concern across the state, because we just can't fill our positions, and to tell 60 good teachers goodbye because of this, I think we're just setting ourselves up for failure. If we can find some flexibility.
It is, one quick question too, if you don't mind. Is there, if you're going to be a charter school teacher, do they have to take, is it a requirement that they have to pass the general knowledge test?
It is a requirement, but I believe they get extended time to do it because of the way they've set up their calendar.
don't have to hire certified teachers.
I was gonna say, I didn't know if it was, I'm not asking for any other reason, but just for my own personal
I mean, the
knowledge.
better ones
If they're
do.
going to be certified in the state of Florida, they
If you're
have to
gonna
take
have
the
a
test.
certified, you have to have general knowledge.
Right, but they don't always have certified teachers.
Right.
And they're
in
not
their
required to have
classrooms.
certified teachers, okay.
By the way, I could also make an argument that this test does not necessarily serve as the litmus of whether or not somebody is or isn't an effective
Absolutely.
educator.
Absolutely.
100% I can make that argument. I have no problem with that. So just understand, I'm not saying no, that this is a bad approach and we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying I need to understand more of it before I make a decision of whether I personally could come online with something like this. The other part I want you to know too is that, and I know you can handle it, but I want you bringing these type of things forward and not being any bit gun shy about it because we may not just like it straight out of the bat. I mean, this is what this conversation is say what are some ideas we need to be thinking of, and then the cool part is that we have 5 board members who genuinely care and are going to think through all of these pieces and parts and check with you and other resources, say what do we need to be thinking on this and where do we align our positions downstream. So even though I may have a somewhat adverse reaction to it off the bat, doesn't mean that I'm adverse to you bringing it forward or wanting to hear more about it. I do. I absolutely want to learn about it.
And this is an issue that we have some time on.
Sure.
Our big piece today is what is our Olay
I was gonna
priority?
say,
And September 22nd is the delegation meeting, so that's,
So-
so you want to, is what you're going to bring to the delegation and what you're going to bring to
I
OLAC.
have one more thing that I'd
Okay.
like to just have you guys discuss or think about, and that is, do we want to consider asking for funding to support our demonstration in high school that we want to open in Neo City? That is something I think that Olay would support.
Sure.
In terms of the
How
county and
much
the
are we
cities.
asking?
20, 30?
100? Yeah, what will we ask for and what?
Sarah, what is our need? No,
What do we think we can get? I mean,
yeah, 400 million, okay.
what do we think we're gonna, yeah, I mean,
Got it.
tying anything to Neo City is good, but what can we get across the finish line? I mean, it's great to ask for something, but
I would suggest we ask for 10, and then if we get 5, we'd be,
if we get
you
2,
know.
we're in good shape.
You just
Right,
said that
we'd
on
be in
camera, didn't you?
good shape, but I really suggest that we come out of the boat asking for 10.
Well, how much do
That
we
would allow
need-
us to really help
how
with
much
the
do we need to
facility
open it?
piece.
How much do we need to open?
Sarah's still working on the capital outlay budget, the final one that she will bring forward to you. It is identified there. We had to find a little bit more funding based on Mark's original estimate.
Sure.
But Mr. Kruppenbacher is currently working on the MOU that we would bring forward to you and the county and UCF. But all the conversation has been very positive so far.
Who owns the land?
county
7,
owns the
8,
land.
10, 9, 10, 5, 6.
10.
I mean, is it,
10.
it's 10.
10.
I mean, that's what it is, okay.
That's the number we asked for.
Who are you asking and what is the pot? that
Yes,
this
that's
10
where
million
I was
is
going.
gonna go?
And what's the approach?
Part of the
Oh,
DOC
good,
part.
details.
This is
Oh, so you
part of the
want-
research proposal.
I mean, are these state dollars or these?
We want to ask, yeah.
Okay, so you want to ask the legislature for an extra 5 to 10 million?
They fund lab schools. This would be a demonstration STEM school.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is so as we were talking about expanding some of our technical education programs that touch key targeted industries for TICO and otherwise, it was a pot of money that if districts use those, it was already there because the legislature said we want to see more of these. So we knew which pot to go after on that. And I had the exact same line of questioning, like, so where do we go? What is the funding source? What is the priority that we could attach something like this ask to that already aligns with something that's already in the pipeline?
The real conversation with UCF is that not only would it be a demonstration school for students, but also for STEM teachers across the state of Florida. That it would be a place where we could attract and train STEM teachers in partnership with the UCF faculty, both their education faculty as well as their College of Engineering, College of Computer Science, College of
In the
Medicine.
past 2 or 3 years, who
faculty.
was successful getting these dollars for these kinds of schools in the state of Florida?
Brevard got a couple of million for a special, one of their academy programs
Okay.
through their legislative delegation. This is a very different concept, because typically what most people have done is to do the lab school approach, where
Right.
the university actually manages the school. We and UCF would prefer that it is a district school,
But-
but it is something that we would be in partnership
Brevard
with.
got 2 million across the finish line for some.
So-
And they had the Speaker of the House.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
let me throw that out.
Yeah.
We have been.
Speak up, you can fight
No, no,
against
no,
this.
no, I'm all for trying. I want to set expectations
Sure.
appropriately. They had, the Speaker of the House was Steve Chris Foley, and the Rules Chairman was Rich Workman. So they had two of the most powerful House members on their delegation. We have the Chairman of the Tourism Committee. Okay, so just we could try. And when are you going to build this school? When do we need the money by? Immediately.
19.
Yeah, but UCF is someone nice to have in your corner on something like this.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how could UCF kind of be worked into this piece?
So here would be, I'm going to work it, but so I'm telling you, so here's the other thing that I think you want to have a conversation with UCF and with the county. So the county and UCF are struggling every year. They want to get $25 million a year for Neo City, and the last 2 years have gotten 15. So they're going to be working hard. They're going to be very concerned if you add another $5-10 million to the ask, that you're making their ability to get their tools money harder. So you all want to all go have that conversation, that you're not stepping on each other's toes. That so we can do it. It sounds to me, getting money for something like this sounds to me like the kind of money that goes in when you've got a powerful legislator and they're able to go, hey, we'll throw our school district. Those are tough things to do. So I just want to get, and they're easy to get vetoed. So we can pursue it, and I'm happy to look into it, and if you put it on the list. But one, I would check with the county and UCF, make sure that we're all singing out of the same hymnal.
And
then number
we did
two,
talk about it at our earlier
just
board meeting.
expectations that's not easy.
The state board chair is also supportive of the concept, and has offered to even potentially identify it as one of her priorities. We just haven't gone there
That's a
yet
big
until
deal.
Frank
Yeah,
gets
that's
the
a big
MOU.
deal.
That's a big deal.
How much longer is Marva in
kind
that
of
position?
going. She was just re-elected
Oh,
as the
okay.
chair.
Okay, as
Yeah.
the chair, okay, good.
And this is the other thing too, that we would certainly be seeking some federal type grant opportunities for, in partnership with the county and UCF to support. But felt like it was worth putting out there for you guys to talk about.
It's worth discussing. I share some of Mike's concerns on it. And I would want to know some of the similar conversations you and I have been having recently about creating a school. I'd want to know everything about the school. What is our pitch? How is it going to form? How is it going to function? What is the form? What do the partnerships look like? Who are the beneficiaries, right? All of those pieces, that it's a fully cooked idea instead of just a concept that we call it a demonstration high school. And so I'd want to kind of unpack that a little bit more.
Did I thought I sent you our original proposal.
You may have. I
But
just may not have looked
yeah.
at it.
I've seen.
And we'll flesh it out some more.
Yeah, but all of those pieces and parts, I mean, and then also where, who are all of the potential partners that come on. And I would even say, so to your point, is it an opportunity to tap some federal dollars for it instead of state dollars? Is it an opportunity to go to the private sector and look for support from the private sector to come alongside as industry partners to this instead of even going to the legislature? So I just want to make sure we're looking at all of those angles. So, local, state, national, and then private, who are really the partners we should be looking to.
I got a question about it. How does it compete
Yeah, I
and
did
or
read your-
complement the IB program at Gateway High School? I mean, you're talking about taking high-achieving kids. We've got that program right across the street. Is it part of that program? Is it independent of that program? I mean, how does that affect the IB program we have right across the street?
I'm really talking about a different group of kids who aren't as necessarily interested in the full flavor of a traditional high school.
Okay.
For example, this would not be a school that offers sports. Okay, that would just be one of the things that the kids understand when they choose
Like
there.
Oxford.
But they would be working hand in hand beside engineers and research professors and those types of things as they're learning in their STEM field.
But you
They
get
can
some-
go to their home zone and play
But
sports.
right, I was going to say, you get some of those TICO kids. I mean, I know some of those TICO kids who go back to Harmony or go back to Celebration and get on the swim team or lacrosse team or whatever. And I'm not discouraging that, but would those opportunities still be available to those students? Or-
If they chose to do so,
Okay,
it
so
does
they're not
become
shut out.
far
They're
more
not shut out.
challenged,
Okay. Sure.
challenging to
So,
do
right,
that.
no, it's a
And typically,
time-
like I said, it's a different
It's a
different
time management and
kid.
transportation issue. Okay, but I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that we're not diluting our IB program right across the street. Okay.
Aside from some of the dollars that we've talked about, which we've talked about a lot, of money, are there other pieces from the academic side that we need to be thinking about as legislative priorities? Whether it's testing, whether it's, like you talked about, the general knowledge exam and the entry point. Is there labor and human resource stuff that we need to be thinking about? Are there other legislative priorities that this board should be considering aside from the ones that we've been talking about for years upon years, or that we're responding or reacting to based upon last session?
I think the two things that we've already talked about would be very, very helpful and important. First of all, if they were to positively impact the district cost differential, that frees up operating dollars that are recurring in nature. So you could potentially say, you know what, we could use those to reward our staff with raises if they've deserved them, or programmatic kinds of things that we want to do, or whatever. Because it's, like I said, it's recurring operational dollars. So I think that would really address that need, because not only do we continue to struggle with our capital need, obviously the operational dollars are challenging and going to continue to be so based on what we're hearing about the state budget and plans for the coming year. But then the other piece are things that are going to address teacher recruitment and retention. That is our biggest challenge right now, is making sure that we have high quality teachers in every classroom. That's why we proposed the potential tweaks to the certification requirements, not to lower the bar, because we want smart, talented people in our classrooms teaching kids, but to take some of these roadblocks out of the way and at least make them manageable, so that we can get people in and keep them, and still ensure that they have the math skills and the reading skills necessary to teach our kids.
Is there anything that we should be talking to the legislature about that is actually going to have a direct, not an indirect, but a direct impact on student learning that we need to be thinking of? You don't have to answer it now. It's just something to ponder. Some of these things are indirect. You know, we have more money, we can do more this, we can do this. Is there some impediment that's currently in place that we need to be thinking about that is absolutely having an impact on driving student learning? Number two, and I think your demonstration high school piece is a good example of the second part. Number two, is there something that is genuinely innovative and shows what our approach to not just sitting within the status quo as a school district, but showing that we're open and willing to compete, and we're willing to think outside of the box of how we're going to be fiscally sound and innovative in delivering high quality education, that we should be thinking about as we talk to the legislature. Just two thoughts from me. All of these other pieces, I tend to agree with some of the original stuff that we went through. I'm very interested in the general knowledge piece personally. But at the same time, you know, I do believe we have a legislature that is looking to say, school districts, don't just constantly complain about what things are. Look at how you can improve yourself. Don't always come to us asking for us to fix or solve all of your woes, but show us how you're really setting the course to be excellent at what you do. And I know we're excellent at a lot of great things. And so I want to make sure that we're thinking about that and creating our narrative and pitching our story about here's where we're going. And I think the tie-in with Bridge and all that is one of the great examples. Whether or not the funding for the high school piece is the right one, because I do tend to agree with Mike that's been a battle, as you know, for years upon years to get the funding in the first place. But I just want us to think outside of the box and not react to what's going on, but instead say, what is the course that we need to be setting? And what Tom Greer and the team previously did with the high growth funding formula, what we've been working on the last 4 or 5 years, I think is a great example of that. We didn't sit and say, well, this is what it is, and we said, we're going to chart our own course. This is what needs to happen because we are unique, we are different, and we think that there's an opportunity here. So I want us to think in those terms as well.
I'd like us to figure out what our Olay point is going to be. Is that what we were here today?
So, Mr. Chairman? 3 minutes. Good. So here would be, as far as getting out of here, you need two things. You need to figure out what you're going to do for Olay and what Kelvin or whoever you designate is going to talk about a month from now at the delegation meeting. So for Olay, my recommendation is I'd put high growth on the top list. There's a priority list and there's a secondary list. On the secondary list for Olay, put the way the charter dollars are spent in 7069, DCD, and the demonstration high school. Throw them in as secondary Olay issues. Secondary means that Doug can then go work on them, which would be great. And then essentially those 4 items are what you talk about at the delegation meeting. And there, you put all 4 of them on the list, and you get up and talk about it. I've already had discussions with everybody on the delegation except for one of our representatives about the revisiting how they're spending charter money in 7069. They're very supportive. Obviously, high growth, they're up to speed on. High school will be new to them. DCD, for some of them, may be new. I just take those 4 items
Basically,
to
the
the
5
delegation
things
meeting.
we've talked about today.
Well, I didn't put certification. It sounded like you guys were still.
Okay,
So I've got, which I'm happy to work on, but I've got 4. I've got high growth, charter, DCD, and demonstration high school.
Gotcha.
So those are the 4 that I've got. With OA, the high growth would be on the quote priority list. Take those 4 to the delegation meeting, and then when you guys decide when school board association and superintendents figure out the language they want to go through and what they want to do in certification, they bring it back to you, and you guys will just direct me, hey, this is something you want to work on, and we'll go for
Well,
it.
and I do believe that the Superintendent's Association and potentially even FEN will take up this issue with certification. So it doesn't have to be something that the board is prioritizing, but I don't want to be working on something or going down a path, even with my professional organization, that you are at least.
Look,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can
hold on.
okay, yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Pace, I think that, what, if I understand Tim correctly, is it's not, we want you to continue on that effort, okay? We haven't made the final decision, but it looks like we're favorable to that. Because it does solve some problems that are very important that you brought up. And it's also something that you feel that needs to be taken up and should be part of that. So that on its own deserves this consideration, right? So I wouldn't just wait. We'll see it, and then, we'll let Mike know
Okay.
when it goes in there,
Thank
all
you,
right?
sir.
And to give, Mr. Weiser and any other member, more time to really evaluate both sides. And if I understand correctly, I think the biggest concern here is that this is there for a purpose. Are we going to in any way undermine that purpose? Because the purpose is that we get the quality teachers that our students deserve. But I also heard, and I was very keen on paying attention to it, is that, this test, like many other tests that comes in, doesn't always purport to be the only way to make that determination. And that the district, and if we had local control, we would make that determination a lot better than this test would have done, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so because of that reason,
Yeah,
I think that we should continue on exploring.
I've done
whether or
some
not
very
that should-
limited research, but some research nonetheless on, because I've said many times, people ask all the time about this, the merit pay. I'm for merit pay in principle. I think the system we have in place is severely flawed. I think there's some research out there, and there's some opportunity, I believe, even with this legislature and for the foreseeable future. And I kind of posed this question to Senator Latvala, to put together some sort of stakeholder committee that really looks at how we evaluate and rate our teachers. Now, I think I've heard Mr. Thacker say it before, and I certainly believe it, just since my parents been in education for so long. If a principal can't tell you who the good teachers at his school are, his or her school, he or she shouldn't be the principal. And I believe that, but for legal standing, I think there's some ways that we can, and this is a higher level, philosophical, statewide kind of
Yeah, but if the
discussion.
law takes away that discretion, it's pretty much, local control.
It does, but what
You're
I'm
talk-
saying is, let's try to create a mechanism that really works. And I'm just throwing that out there. I think there's some opportunity for that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, and that's why I struggle, and that to bring it home.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I struggle with then limiting what we asked our teachers to know, since there's no other way.
Yeah, but I think that the point is that we have this test that purports to make
Oh, no,
this
I-
decision.
I get it.
And that we're mandated by law to do it. So we lose that control. That idea that you have about a principal making a determination or superintendent means nothing because
And there's
we have
issues
this
with that as
test.
well.
Because we have this test. And so if the test really is that much better, then I'm all for it. But I'm beginning to hear that that's not the truth. So,
For the record, I'm good with for the OLA.
Thank you, board.
I'll
We're gonna
work with
transition
John
to-
on coming up with that language.
guys,
Okay.
take about 3 or 4 minutes while we give the next
right.
impact fee.
Thank you.
While we get ready for our impact fee discussion.
Don't you have to go?
You made it
I
just
feel like
release
it's
this.
leaving now.
kind of talk with our folks from Tyndall Oliver about the process as it has been planned, but then to provide input for specific questions, considerations that you want for us to look at as they work through the next phase of the study. So we'll turn it over to you guys, and then really it's going to be more of us listening to you as a board than providing information.
Do you want me to go from the hard copies? I don't know if you are able to see the.
See the hard copy?
Is that the same thing, ma'am? Can we
Yes.
write on these?
Yes,
Oh, yeah,
of course,
sure.
those are yours.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
I can, yes, I can do this. So we have a brief presentation just giving a little bit of the background and the methodology, and then we'll turn it to you. In terms of the background, as you know, last study was updated in 2014, and we are using what we call a consumption-based methodology, which was the methodology prior to that as well. And the study also fulfills the need to reflect most current localized data. So impact fee by definition is one-time capital charge to new development. It's really for new capacity. It does help maintenance by freeing up general tax dollars, but otherwise it's for capacity only. So if you go to page 3, top of it, not going in my own thing, right? Okay. The basic impact fee formula that we are using looks at the cost of providing school capacity, so the school buildings, buses, and any kind of infrastructure value. From that, we subtract any non-impact fee funding from future development. So to the extent that school district is using the millage and other revenue sources, part of it comes from new development, that's subtracted. And this net cost is multiplied by demand, and that's, of course, is measured in terms of student generation rate. In terms of the study schedule, we kicked off in May, and basically, the technical study is going to probably go through September. We'll come back with the results late August, and then have some meetings with the stakeholders and the board, and then based on those directions, the study will continue.
Do we have a list of emails for those stakeholders that were at that May meeting? Do you know, or a list of who they were?
Yes. Yes.
I would say in the future, if we do these, those people should be notified if we're having a meeting like this. And if you have any other meetings along the way, I think
Growth Management Task Force, County
I don't
Manager.
think they were involved yet. Dr. Pace, do you remember if anyone from the Growth Management Task Force was there? We'll get you the list.
Okay.
Probably ought to get the original list too of who was invited and who
Yes,
came.
we will.
So as far as the technical study approach, this is just a quick summary of the change between the last two studies. So between 09 and 14 studies, rates remain relatively stable within 10% up or down. And this study, again, will review the cost of providing school capacity, and then how this is being funded, and what other revenue sources being used, and then the demand component. So in the demand component, different from last time, we were asked to look at short-term rentals. That was brought up in the last study toward the end of it. This time we are trying to address it from the beginning, and that's one thing we like your input actually today as well.
I've got
as far as the,
I've got a question.
yes, of course.
What?
Remember the deal we made?
Just write the question down
Okay,
and
okay.
bring it up. You have to just write it down, that way you don't forget.
Sure, I won't forget.
All right.
Okay.
So one thing we'd like to show is that school infrastructure is very expensive. It's between schools and transportation, they make up about 75 to 85% of all infrastructure local governments provide. So that's, and then they are only charged on residential land uses. So that's why those two fees tend to be high, and then schools especially high for residential because it's not split between residential and non-residential.
From a strategic point, it's really important for that to sink in, because I've done with all the public facilities, water, sewer, parks, all of them. Schools and transportation make up by far the most money that you invested up to date and will invest in the future. And everybody wonders why you're always talking about transportation and you're always talking about schools. They are the most expensive capital, and from a school perspective, operating that the community does. Now, police and fire really hit on your operating budget from a city or county, but schools and transportation are the topic in terms of public facilities. So you probably knew that, but it's really important to understand why these become the.
I actually thought schools would have been a bigger piece of the pie. as compared to transportation.
Yeah. Well, the thing with transportation is you've built over years billions of dollars of right-of-way that now if you had to go buy and rebuy,
Okay.
you could never buy it again. So transportation's got a really interesting history to it in terms of what happened during the first development cycle. But the current value of that system is
I
huge
understand.
because
Yeah,
of the
understand.
the value of the asset.
So when we update the cost component, the variables or data we want to evaluate is any recent or upcoming local construction, of course. And then we supplement that with data from other districts statewide. Then we look at the insurance values of current buildings. And in terms of land, is anything that's purchased, appraised, as well as vacant land sales. So we try to look at it from different perspectives. Also have discussions with architects to see what they are seeing. Just to kind of show you a trend chart, this is going back to '94, this school cost per square foot construction cost. And again, up to 2005, the costs were pretty stable. They were increasing slightly, and then we went through that crazy period that we call crazy. Everything shot up and then decreased, and now we are seeing again an increase. And we are hearing, especially in Central Florida, although hopefully it doesn't seem like you are being affected yet, but that's what we are hearing, like when we do work in Orange County, Seminole County, and so it's another kind of sort of a high.
Your last study was conducted in 2013, 2014, correct?
Right, yeah.
It's really important if you look at that curve. Because
Yes.
every time we do a study, we try to figure out what we're probably going to see. And what we're probably going to see is the numbers now are different than they were in 2013 and 14, and it's going on statewide.
They better be.
Yeah. So, but that's good to let people know that it's not just a one-time go out and kind of guess at what you're building. It's really got some good trends in terms of understanding where you're headed.
And then for credit, again, we look at how you funded any capacity past 5 years, what's programmed in the CIP and the funding sources, and then also any debt associated with capital expansion. So those will all be considered. And then we just like to go over a few variables that tends to affect the fees and the operations, or what you see. So the Osceola County is ranking in the state out of 67 counties. The county itself is right now 19 in population, but it's second in population growth rate. So it's growing at an average rate of 2.3% is projected through 2035. So that's pretty big. And then 8 in absolute growth. So in terms of number of people added, it's 8. So that you have a high growth county. They are 7th in student generation rate. So it's a young county with a lot of students. So your overall generation rate, like this is all students, not just traditional, but it's 0.4, and the range is 0.1 to 0.6, so it's high up there. So that's kind of some of the challenges for the district.
You are a challenging county, I can tell you, on the average, in terms of growth rate, number of students per home, and all those issues. It's interesting when you work in this county to see those issues you're facing.
We see in our budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, the budget reflects.
So this basically chart showing the building permit activity, and again, like we did the first study in '09, it was right after the boom, and then 14 is the crash time period, and now the permitting is picking up again. And this is a median age comparison. Obviously, Osceola County is younger and it's getting younger compared to the state, and that fits with the generation rates we are seeing. And this, again, age distribution, the orange bars is Florida and blue bars are Osceola County, and you see that blue bars being at the very younger age groups dominating. And this kind of shows you the enrollment trends and the projections. And generation rate, again, consistent with the age, is above the state average. And then the student generation rate methodology is basically looking at all homes, and it only looks at traditional schools that the school district is primarily responsible. So we don't include charter schools and private schools and so on. And it takes those addresses and matches with the property appraiser database to see what type of homes they are coming from. So this is a comparison between the last two studies. Now, one thing I like to say, like last study, and we are doing the same thing this study, we start with more detailed land use categories, so we separate single family from townhouse, multifamily, condo, and so on. So you'll be able to see all those separately starting out. And in the last study, the final decision of how they should be combined was this final schedule. So for one example, multifamily was quite a bit higher than condos, but then when they blended, they became sort of a average of the two. And then the other issue that we always ask is the impact of charter schools, how they are helping the school district. And you see an increase in the role of charter schools over time. So there used to be, for example, between 2006 and 11, an average of 175 kids per year being absorbed by charter schools. And that number jumped to about 1,000 or 1,100 over the past 5 years.
Well, it looks like there's 1 year that's a bit of an.
Yeah, 1 year is you're right.
But it has a huge
Yeah,
effect
1
on
year
it.
is huge.
That's more like,
That's gotta be evened out statistically somewhat, doesn't it? Or
Yeah.
We're gonna get,
yeah, that average would be
we're
more
gonna get
like,
hosed in our
Maybe.
calculations.
Yeah, you're talking about 15?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's because of a lot of extra planning years taken in 14, that they rolled that number over.
Yeah.
you had a real
Yeah, but
dip,
we need
you had the three and then a jump up. But
Yeah,
that-
opened,
That
like,
average 1,000 may
that
drop
year.
down to like 600 or 700 if you didn't have that 1 year.
Yeah, it looks to me we've got more like an average of 700, 800 if you run across that thing.
Without it.
Just,
That's correct.
because if they're gonna take that many kids out and they don't continue to go at that rate, which I don't think they will, we're gonna get,
We're actually seeing some pretty good numbers in that regard this year.
in going towards them,
The other way.
coming back.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's what I'm looking at.
Homeschool kids and McKay scholarship kids as well.
And this chart shows the traditional schools added. So the thing that's sort of interesting, in some counties, when we see charter schools starting to increase the rate that they are absorbing, we see a decrease in school districts' kids. And this
Not
hasn't
here.
happened here. So even with the charter school assistance, you are still adding pretty much the same average rate from before. And then I guess over the last year or so, it may be increased.
That is significantly different than the other counties.
And the same thing, if you look at our average from 6 to 11, you've got, if you take that anomaly out, our average is 1,000, not 600.
Right, right.
That's, to me, that's a real outlier for
Yeah.
for some obvious reasons, but.
And the other thing we kind of look at is the vacancy rates, because these homes are built, but, so you will not get any impact fees from them, they paid it. But then, as they get filled after the depression, you will start seeing the kids with a delay. So that we are seeing the vacancy rates going down, and so that will be another area to kind of keep in mind. And then seasonal homes, again, as they increase, they don't generate as much kids, and again, that's hopefully with the short-term rentals, we can address that. So again, so that's basically just the overall approach and some of the variables, and then with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions, get your input.
Seasonal home trend. Are these seasonal homes deed restricted?
No, these are by census, any homes that are occupied less than 6 months.
Okay.
In it.
So let me ask a
Yeah,
question.
they're not deed restricted.
No.
And they get turned over in about 5 to 6 years.
I was, recently, in the past 6 months, I had a developer take me out to one of their developments in West Osceola County, Magic Development. And there's a front desk, people gotta check in, it's maintained as a hotel, yet they're paying impact fees, yet they got no students coming out of that. Now, they're telling me there are deed restrictions relative to that they comply with, same deed restriction a hotel has to comply with, which I haven't looked at all the paperwork. Do we know if that's the case with some of these developments or not?
I'm not familiar with it.
There's no deed restriction at Magic Development.
Okay. I guess, Mr. Perry, is there a deed restriction that can be developed for some of these vacation rentals where they're paying a bed tax, paying a hotel tax, where can there be some language developed for them so that it's kind of like a 55 and older community. There's age restrictions in some communities relative to living in, like the Village is a good example, or Good Samaritan Village. Similarly, is there something for things that are developed and maintained as tourist communities. I'm not talking about single-family homes. I realize there are single-family homes that go into inventory that, once they become 10 or 15 years old, people buy them as regular houses that occupy them. But there are some developments that are coming out of the ground that have got a front desk like a hotel. And I don't know what we do or don't want to do with those. And if they're not deed restricted, then this conversation's moot. But if there's a way to deed restrict them, so that way they're not impacting the schools, because I would think anybody paying a tourist tax on a dwelling unit, a bed tax like a hotel, I don't know, it's like they build an embassy suite.
So then deed restrict.
Right.
If they deed restrict it, right now, senior living, or 55 and overs can deed restrict out.
Right.
But the problem we have with the short-term rentals is we know at some point they switch, and as soon as the first one switches, what is our ability to collect an impact?
I understand that.
It's zero.
It's zero.
I'm talking about something like the embassy.
Well, there is, but nobody's going to.
Well, the Embassy Suite's a good, Embassy Suite's open as a hotel. Some of these developments are opening as hotel, essentially operating as a hotel. Now, the Embassy Suites, I'm going to use that as an example, because that's probably the most recent new hotel that's opened up here. Embassy Suites is never, the one on 535.
Okay.
That's never going to, I would suspect, even though they've got little kitchenettes in them and they've got 2 rooms, that's never going to convert itself into I would suspect, senior living or single-family units. So I'm not trying to, I don't want to put us in a position where we are jeopardizing our ability to pay for growth. At the same time, I'm looking for a way to be fair relative to some
If you
things.
call yourself a 55 and older, if you call yourself a deed restricted resort rental or a hotel, then you won't have to pay. If you don't, you have to pay.
Right, no,
Most of them are not willing.
And that's why they have to pay,
To
Jay.
deed restrict it because they know what's coming down the road.
They know they're going to age
Okay.
out and they have to sell to a family.
And if that's the case, then I'm not interested in giving them any kind of breaks. Okay.
That's my thoughts.
Everybody answer the question.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Dr. Pace having this meeting. I know I brought this up, a couple meetings ago, and thank you all for working with us and coming in. My biggest thing was that, and I've done some more research this in, is that we only have 3 categories, right? We know, my biggest thing was our planning commission is being told by this district that we're going to build 300 apartments over by the exact same apartments next to apartments that are generating essentially 1 kid per unit, and we're telling them it's going to be 0.2, correct. So that's got to change. I was just given some information this morning about the information that we gave, let me go back and get it, by a planning commissioner, that there is 700 units in Poinciana Boulevard going in, 2,800 bedrooms because they're 4 to 5 bedroom homes. And we, the school district, are telling the planning commission that these 700 homes are going to generate 218 kids. Now, we all at this table know that's not true. So how do we figure, my biggest thing is I want to tell the planning commission the truth. When the county commission approves a development, I want them to know exactly, or almost exactly, how many kids.
Reality.
I want them to know the reality, so that when they approve 700 homes in Poinciana Boulevard, that they know there's going to be 1,000 kids there, and how much that's going to cost our community.
Something's going
And
to
that's
be
not a
shooting
bad, that's
themselves.
not negative or positive, that's not pro-growth, anti-growth, that's truth. And that's what I want is truth. So I guess my question is, how far can we go? I know the county probably wants to make it easy and streamlined, they want the 3, I get that. I don't think that's feasible. So how far can we go? Can we say low-income,
Subsidized apartments.
subsidized
Or,
apartments are a different category? Are we allowed to do that? Let me just finish so you can answer all of them.
Go ahead.
Can we is it possible to work on something, and I've heard you're working on a square footage number, can we work on a bedroom number? Are we allowed to do that? Can we do bedroom? Do we
St.
know?
John's is doing square
Yeah.
footage, I just saw theirs.
Do we have the information that says a $400,000 or $500,000 3-bedroom house generates this many kids, and a $200,000 house with 4 bedrooms generates that many kids? And are we allowed to do that? I mean, I'm fine if legally we're not allowed to do that. I can fight that fight later. But what I'd like to know is how many categories can we do? And what can we say to the county? Because obviously throwing condos where we may have a lot of senior living that isn't deed restricted into the same as assisted living apartments, that just doesn't work for me. And board, that's my shtick. That was the whole thing that I was very upset about, is having these planning commissioners come to me and say, why are you telling us these numbers? They are not right and we know it. And so I'd like to get it right and tell the truth.
If you go to this slide, your median age trend, this slide really scared me when I saw it, and almost all my notes have to do with this slide. But this goes exactly back, I think, to what Ricky's talking about. That group of our median age being 34 or 5, whatever that number is, compared to the rest of the state at 42. Much more childbearing and raising going on here.
Right.
And I don't know, all my question, what does that mean? I think this means a lot. I don't know what it means and what we do about it.
Well, the red and the blue, the red, we showed you the student generation rate, that's the statewide average.
Yep.
We have counties that are above that.
Mhm.
The counties above that are at 0.2, the counties that below that are 0.4, 0.5. So that we've got some lines we run for our analysis that show that the average age of the county goes up, the student generation rate goes down.
Sure.
So yes, that is clearly a.
You don't have to show me
Does that factor
that.
into this calculation at all?
Well, that's, when we come up with 0.4 something versus 0.3, it clearly is right in there, boom. Every time you add a home, you're adding almost a half a student, some people are only adding 0.2 students. So you're adding students per home at twice the rate that some of our counties, so yes.
But my whole thing is, and actually just to add, I'm for trying to find a short-term rental number. You know, if we know that, if we know that if they don't want to deed restrict, fine. So, but if we know now that homes that were taken out of short-term rental, what is their impact? I mean, we know they're having a great impact on the west side, but that's, that was 2008, 2009, I think everybody would agree hopefully was an anomaly.
Right.
So I'm for that as well, but how many categories are we allowed to have?
I'll start, you jump in when
I'm gonna let you do that.
Okay.
I have a
So-
tendency to interrupt her.
So, no, for one, we can definitely separate, sorry, let me just see where they were. Whatever our three categories were.
Well, and last time you
I
presented,
passed
you
it.
did present different categories based on square footage in
Correct.
major count as
Correct.
well, and philosophically, we disagreed with it.
Right, okay. So, and we are doing it anyway automatically, but we are splitting all these categories to begin with. So you will see single-family townhouse separately, multifamily condo separately. So that will, right there, show even overall multifamily is quite a bit higher than the 0.2. And then we can definitely do.
I'm sorry, you lost me completely. What is higher than the 0.2?
The
Multifamily.
multifamily and
With
condo.
apartments, right? That's
Yeah, those are
multifamily is apartments.
I'm sorry, yeah, apartments versus
But that is
condos.
0.2.
But she's
That's
saying
the
it's gonna be
combined.
higher.
Oh, it's going to be, okay, I'm sorry. That's what I didn't understand what you said.
Yeah.
Okay. So your future studies.
And this is what hurt us here, the 2009 to 2014, look at the decrease. I mean, it went down so much. So now, but it's went way, you saw the spike.
But think about who's buying a condo versus who's renting our apartments.
Yes.
And the student generation
Correct.
difference there. So
It's
that's
right
what,
back
when
to
you
this.
average those together,
Yes.
that number
It's that
goes
anomaly
down.
that killed us.
If you hold them separately, multifamily is going to be much higher in terms of student generation.
I'm fine with that.
So.
You know,
That makes sense.
But I guess
that's-
my big point, not to interrupt, but I do want to make this before I lose it, is if the county really likes this way of just 3, and that's good, and they're the ultimate like they have to make the ultimate approval of the impact fee
Has the
study.
county said they like these 3?
It's my understanding that
I've never heard that.
they like to just have the 3 numbers.
The count, if I remember this right, on the multifamily and condo category, they were concerned that it's easy to say I'm building a condo and convert it to apartments or vice versa, and they did not feel like they have a good mechanism to capture when that happens. Like,
Ownership.
if it changes, normally you should be able to charge for the differential.
I don't
If
think any
that's-
of us are concerned with the condo versus multifamily home.
No, I think we are.
We should be.
We should be.
Oh, that's right, the
Yeah.
condos are
The condos are what
They're
lowered
driving
that
it.
student generation rate
Yes.
for apartments
right.
significantly, I would guess.
So So you can definitely separately calculate, and if nothing else, you can use it for planning purposes, even if impact fee ends up being something else. I mean, at least you'll have that information. We can also tier it by size, which may be the sort of addressing. The one thing we cannot do, I think, is do it by income, because impact fees are supposed to be.
Maybe that's the wrong word. I was talking about maybe the value, the home value.
I think what we do is there's two different issues. One is planning and one is impact fees. Impact fees is charged for a home for a 30-year period. And what's happened is that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the homes were 1,500 square feet, and they're still there, the small homes, and they're affecting the average. And the new homes are 2,500, 3,000 square foot. And so when you look at both size and age, the newer homes generate more students than all homes, usually, not always. Has a lot to do with what county you're in.
I was going to say, in this county...
Has a lot to do with that graph.
Yeah, in this county, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was about 1/10 of the population that there is now.
But you still have those homes there that are affecting it. So what some counties, again, it varies in terms of what you want to do. Some counties will, for example, I think in Hillsborough County, new homes generated 40% more students than the average home.
Especially for single family.
For single
Not
family.
always, yeah.
And so for planning purposes, in their high growth area, they needed to plan the right number of students showing up.
Sure.
For impact fees, which is the whole life of a long-term period, they decided to use the average of all homes. In Broward County, they try to use new homes, which is for the first 5 or 10 years, that homes generate a lot more students than the average
So that
home.
methodology is accepted
Yes,
and
it
is legal?
It can be done, and yes, we've produced those. It more to do with policy and philosophy of what you want to charge that structure over a period of time in different counties charge it. So we have counties that have both used new homes to calculate their fee, and they do it by size, because bigger homes generate more students. And what we've done also is we'll run a correlation of the size of the home and number of bedrooms, and there seems to be a break point that certain size houses
Sure.
have more bedrooms. It's so much easier to measure the size than somebody saying it's not a bedroom and then adding a closet. So,
Are you going to present that information to us with your study, or would we have to request that from you now?
We are right now doing 5 categories and by size.
Okay.
We weren't going to do the bedrooms just because
I'm fine with size if you...
Okay.
Size works really well.
And then on the short-term rentals, one approach is if deed restriction is not doable, then one approach is doing those west side, the area, where the short-term rentals are concentrated, and just look at that area's generation rate. So it's not zero, because some of them are normal homes still, even in that area. It's not all rental, but it's lower. So what that does is the rest of the county becomes higher. Now, short-term rental area pretty small, so it's not like it's doubling the rest of the county, but there's an impact because you have so many students coming from somewhere. So if we are starting to distribute or look at how it's, how much of it is coming from one sub-area, then the remaining area is generating
But your
more.
study's not going to show you, you could look at the area, but your study's not going to show you what used to be a short-term rental and now is not, right? I
No.
mean, that's really the number that you need
Yeah.
is what home came online as a short-term rental and how long ago that
Right.
was, and then able to take those numbers, 5 years generates this many kids, 10 years old generates this many kids. And I know that's a complex number,
Yeah.
and there's probably no way to do it, but that's the real number
Right.
that you would need to make that determination.
That's
Right.
one reason, that's almost like the transitional thing, charge over the whole period of time, not the first 5 years, because
Yeah.
eventually you gotta do it. And that's the reason the deed restriction makes it really clean. Trying to do it by area without deed restriction, what you're doing is almost overcharging one geographic area as another area transitions to more and more students, and you're undercharging that area for the first, because of the first 5 years. And that's, I think this is where we ended up last time. They don't want to deed restrict it. It gets kind of awkward to try to get fairness with doing it by area. So very.
You know, and I don't mean to be strong on this, but I mean, look, if you have the mechanism there for a deed restriction, but once you say you're not going to deed restrict, I mean, we understand the ultimate outcome. We understand the home's going to be used for 5, 6, 7, 10 years.
There's a reason they're not.
There's a reason they're not deed restricting. We all understand why, and so I'm fine with charging the impact fee on homes that aren't deed restricted.
We would need direction from the board as we work through this process. If you want us to include something in the ordinance like we have for 55 and older, that if they are a deed-restricted short-term rental, they could be exempt or whatever you guys wanted to decide, but that's something we would need direction. Our current ordinance only provides exemptions for deed-restricted 55 and older communities.
If a student, if a parent enrolls their child because they're living in a home that they bought with this restriction, is the district obligated to enroll that child in the school?
We're obligated to enroll any child that shows up at our door.
Okay. So, I'm trying to understand exactly what the deed restriction does for us. I mean,
Unless we have a
If it's not
doesn't-
policed, it does nothing.
If we have a
But, no, but it's not illegal. My question wasn't that, actually. It doesn't matter if we police it. We have to enroll that child.
Yes, but we
By
don't,
law.
the
Right,
deed
but then
restriction
the
without a
deed restriction-
mechanism.
Right, but then the governing body over that community would say, you're not allowed to have a permanent resident living in this home, you're in violation of the deed restrictions.
For
That
enrolling, for
community-
legally enrolling their kid in a school, for doing something that is, that's,
No, if it's
I don't think anybody's
established
talking about
that-
not letting the kid in. I'm not.
It's not about, yeah, it's not about the kid, it's not even
It's not
about
a
the
kid's
school, it's
issue.
about a violation of the use of the real estate. If the real estate is restricted in its use, that it's not for permanent housing, it's only for transient housing, short-term rental, and you're living there beyond a certain period of time, as outlined in the deed restriction, then the governing body of that community would have to say to that property owner or user, you're not allowed to live in this property for a full-time basis, these are short-term rentals only.
but they can also do the opposite as well. They can say, you know what, we're not gonna enforce that.
That's my point.
The
If you don't
HOA
have a
can do
policing
that.
mechanism, then, right. I have a question. Why are townhomes looped in with single-family homes and condos are with multifamily? And I understand that we can break some of that out. In reality, condos and townhomes really function the same. They're really just an ownership structure, but the functional use of the real estate is really identical. You can have a townhome look identical to a condominium, but yet have two different ownership structures, one being a townhouse, one being a condominium. And so I would imagine that the townhouses are actually having a negative impact on the student generation rate for single-family houses, and that those have to be bifurcated in order for us to get a real number.
Yeah, single-family detached versus single-family attached is basically townhouse. Townhouses are lower, and again, that was a decision made at the time. I personally, I mean, it may have been to moderate some of the detached.
If I were going to do anything with looking at these categories, I would say single-family should stand alone, multifamily should stand alone, and condo and townhouse really are more paired uses of real estate than any of the other combinations that we currently have.
But you're doing them all five anyway.
Yeah,
different.
you'll be able to see it, and then especially if it shows very
there's
close,
a
that
big
makes
difference.
I
perfect
mean,
sense.
I don't know how hard this is for you guys, but we keep coming up with additional cuts, this thing. How hard is it to do, I'm just gonna make the number up, 10 cuts, and you bring them in here, and all of a sudden they group themselves?
Yeah,
We look at
sure.
these three things are all at .41.
Yeah.
So you know what, there's a reason to, okay, we put that group together. And we kind of start with a broad list and see if it naturally narrows
Yeah.
itself to
Sure.
3, 5, or 7, I don't know. I don't know how hard that is for you
No, I
guys.
got you. The other thing I would say on the size thing, I discussed this at length last time we went through this process. I'm not favorable towards the size component. I think you take a very dangerous approach as a governing body when you start to charge people more for choosing to invest more in their community. Because the bigger your home, the more your investment in the real estate. It is a one-for-one. It doesn't matter. You're not going to build a 1,000 square foot home for the same price you can build a 2,000, or a 2,000 the same as you can build for a 4,000. And so what you're really saying to people is, if you choose to invest in our community by building a nice over $225,000, to use that price point we've talked about before, over $225,000 home, we want to charge you more or penalize you more. And the size of your home, although through the methodology you use will show that sometimes a larger home may generate more, that's not necessarily always the case. And I've used my own circumstance, and yours is probably the same at this point. You know, my parents have a 2,000 square foot home and there's 2 people. Pam and I have a 3 times that size home and there's only 2 people. Should I pay more of an impact fee than they do? They had 4 kids actually living, but let me finish my point. They had 4 kids living in that 2,000 square foot home. I had 2 kids living in a 5,500 square foot home.
But that's it, you know, it's anecdotal.
It is, but it isn't.
No, but this is real.
But I live this every day in my profession. I'm telling you that it's not necessarily always the case that people that are buying bigger homes are necessarily having more kids. It really has more to do with family structure and
Yep.
how you're seeing real estate being utilized in our community. And many times it's not necessarily that they're buying your house and moving multiple generations into it. They're buying my parents' house and moving multiple generations.
The issue comes with the people who can buy the bigger houses are sometimes older. But they're building a house in my neighborhood right now. It's 2,000, it's actually a tad under 2,000 square feet. It has 7 bedrooms. Happens to have
Those are
2
7 closets.
They are 7 closets. Has 2 kitchens, one upstairs and one downstairs. That's 2 entrances. For some reason, the county doesn't think this is a short-term rental.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't make it, when somebody catches it and they stop it, what's it gonna be?
But I agree with Mr. Weisshire
30 kids in it.
100%. That's why I asked the thing about value. I know that if a 4-bedroom house that's built on a 2,000 square feet or 2,500 square feet, that only costs $250,000, just by the numbers that we've seen, I know that's going to generate a lot of kids, right? I know that a 6,000 square foot house that costs $500,000 is probably not going to be bought by the family that had, or multiple families, or a family that has 6 kids running around. I'm thinking it's going to be maybe a retiree, or maybe a younger wealthy couple, or maybe they have 2 or 3 kids, but on a whole, that $500,000 home, that's why I asked the question about value. And I don't know if we're there, because I agree with Tim in principle.
To be honest with you, we find that in older communities that have very high-value homes.
Yeah.
When it hits a certain point, it drops off. We don't find that in the younger communities. But to answer your question, if there's 50,000, and I don't know if there's 50, say there's 50,000 homes that are between 25 and 3,500, there's going to be a range of students in those homes.
Yep.
And there's 50,000 homes between 500 and 1,500. There's going to be a range. If this range statistically is not dramatically different than that one, then we don't give you 2 numbers. But what we find is that if you take the 50,000, 3,000 square foot homes and the 50,000, 1,200 square foot homes, that these have about 30%, all of them, not yours, but all of them with with a range, have only averaged 20 or 30% more kids, and that's what the fee's about. It's charging for the typical average home, not the,
And that's where I think seeing 10 levels or
so
something.
we'll show you the data, and
then
what
we
you'll
can
see
compare.
is, you'll see breaks, you'll see the size of the home, the number of students staying constant, and all of a sudden, you get to a certain size, and the student generation rate increases within this group, and then it just levels off.
So let me
And
ask
so
you,
we'll provide that information, you can decide.
But maybe there's a breakdown then on square footage
There is.
that,
We will.
so like once you
Yeah.
get to say 5,000 square foot,
It just-
It
then
goes
it
down.
falls
Yeah,
off.
it
And
does.
so that middle
Yeah.
median house, so we know that 4-bedroom house that's in between 2,000 and 3,000 square foot,
Right.
it's a ton of
That's the-
kids, but we
right.
know that 5,000 foot, which those families are making this big investment and not generating as many kids. And
So
maybe we can
we'll
have that
provide the
different
data,
number.
and y'all can,
Yeah.
you'll make.
That would be
And-
fantastic.
The other comment I'll make, which we do, I think most firms don't do, is that we calculate the average tax of new homes versus the average home.
Tax or impact fee?
The tax, the value of the
Taxable
homes,
value.
the taxable value and the revenue. So what we end up doing is charging everybody for the average, but we give them the new home value, which is
Credit
a
for
larger
the-
home, the
In terms
credit.
of credit calculation,
Right.
the increase.
No, no, I
Even though
understand.
all homes average 12,000 square foot in the whole county, all new homes are 3,000 square foot, and they're 40% more valuable. We give, for being very conservative, we give everybody that 40% increase in value, because new homes generate more homes. So when we do separate this, the new homes are already getting 40% more money, because we don't give the average. We give the credit for moving forward. New homes that get constructed on the average generate more money than all existing homes.
Right.
And we calculate that, and we make sure we give that credit.
two points. One is, just so you guys know where my head's at, I think the other part of this becomes wanting to be very careful I think our entire ad valorem tax system is broken because, again, it penalizes people for investing in their own communities, right? The more real estate investment you make, the more tax you pay, even though you place potentially no additional burden on public services. Oh, great, now I just lost my second point.
Well, I'll.
Go ahead. And I'll
Okay,
go with
thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate, number one, what we're doing, and I appreciate the fact that we're looking to be as fair and equitable as we can, and that's great, and we're looking for all kinds of
Truthful.
Okay, equitable. And we're looking for different levels so we can do some comparison analysis. I will say this, though. I mean, I've been doing this, obviously, a very long time. No matter what we come up with, somebody is going to come up who thinks of themselves as credible, and we may or may not agree with the credibility, who's going to tell you why it's wrong, what the number should be, where it is, et cetera. And there'll be 3 or 4 of them who will dissect it 2 or 3 different ways. And I'm not telling you that they are going to be wrong or they're going to be right or these people are going to be wrong or right. That's just what's going to happen. And we need to put ourselves in a position where we really feel as comfortable as we're going to feel, because whatever we do, someone at the end of the day is going to say it's unfair, we're getting hit with this or that or that or this, and then the question becomes, are we doing the best we can? Is it defensible? And that's just the nature of the beast, and that's not a criticism on what we're doing. That's just, I've seen it before. I remember we took our impact fees from $3,000 to $9,000. Jim Lentz railed at me, ran out, said it's going to kill development. 6 months later, he called me and said, it hasn't hurt us one bit. So, again, I'm just giving you some perspective, and it's not a knock on anything. I'm just telling you what to expect.
For what it's worth, Mr. Wheeler, I want those folks to come in.
Me too.
And
I
give
do
us
too.
their thoughts.
I do too.
I want the Home Builders Association to come in. I want the Growth Management Task
I
Force
sent
folks to
this
come
schedule
in
just now
and
to
say,
Dr.
hey, this is wrong or
Walter.
this is right. And then you know what? The 5 of us are going to make a decision on what we want to send over to the county for an ordinance.
No, I already took a picture of this and I sent it to several people involved with growth management in the
I'm
county.
fine with that, Jay.
My other,
So am I.
the point I couldn't remember was, can we, I feel like so much of what we do with this is really a reactionary approach to what things have been, as opposed to what we really believe they're going to be. And I'll give you an example, is if we talked in 2001, and we talked about the size of homes that people were building, we would be talking about 3,000 square foot homes all day long. McMansion was the thing, all going up before the recession. Then we look at the recession, and obviously we know what happened during that time with growth and development and new construction. But now you look at what people are wanting to build, it's not those same homes. There's a different trend. So we're seeing a utilization difference with how families are living within our own community and how they're developing their households with multi-generation households and all of that. But in addition to that, we're seeing how people are choosing to buy homes. I'll give you an interesting example. I said to my wife last night, I paid the electric bill today. Can you believe how much it was? All right. Never do I talk about our electric bill, but it just happened to be a lot for the month of July. My point of using that, though, is people are looking at those things, and so they're starting to build smaller and smaller, more efficient, tighter envelope homes. So are we really looking at what the next 5 years, 10 years of real estate development is going to look like when we're factoring these things in, or are we just saying, well, people traditionally built 2,500 square foot homes, that's what they've done? Are we looking at what FlexGen homes? You guys are probably familiar with those. FlexGens, where you're building a home and you're essentially building an entire mother-in-law suite attached to it, and you're having mom and dad move in with son and daughter-in-law and family, and now you have multifamily living. I mean, all of those type of things are happening all across the nation, and particularly in the Southeast, I've seen a lot of it. So how much are we really projecting what real estate trends are looking like as we're building these methodologies? Is that does have an impact on what we do and how we see the utilization in our own community.
But this snapshot of 2014 is hurting us now. So we mean, and I'm with you, but we need a snapshot of today that's going to at least give us the ability to give some sort of valuable information to our planning commission. And you know what? In 4 years, whoever's on this board is probably might be sitting here and having the same conversation of, geez, can you believe what happened to these trends? But we have to give the snapshot somehow.
Oh,
right?
and let me add one more point. And so you guys may know some of this because I've talked about it at different points, but maybe not here, is part of my work on the national level is looking at all the trends that impact real estate across the United States. And part of the work that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years is looking at the American dream of home ownership and how is that changing based upon generational trends that are taking place. And we conducted a study called Dwelling 2.0, and how will people begin to identify what it is that they want to own or where they want to live. So there was everyone moving out to the suburbs, and now there's going back into the urban centers. People wanting a lot of green space at their properties, and now saying we don't want green space, we want community green space, right? So those type of trends have to impact the discussions that we have, or the thoughts that we put into this, I'd imagine, too, because all of this afternoon I meet with some people on this type of stuff. I mean, we're not talking about let's build a home the way we built it 10 years ago. We're talking about let's do it the way it should be in the next 10 years. So I just don't know how much that plays into your study, if at all, and then what we need to be thinking about and how we...
More in our planning, strategic planning, than it does. Our fees are 30-year, long-term, and trying to deal with short-term issues. But when we're doing studies, we find urban areas getting smaller and all this going on, and we see a market in the suburban area, the homes are still big, and we have to plan one type of growth rate in a suburban area and a different growth rate and different size. So when we're doing strategic planning, we look at location, size, and trends and try to deal with that, because it's really important to deal with that in terms of your growth rate. But from the impact fee perspective, we don't get quite to that level, other than they'll show you some really nice, here's the right rate. Well, I think what you're going to see is between 0 and 1,200 square foot, really a lower, student generation rate, but anywhere from 15 to 5,000, it really flattens out, and you got this range. We'll give you some stuff that we can do from an impact fee, but from a strategic planning perspective, that's where we go much further
I'll give
into
you an
that.
example.
And I think legally we have to be careful with that.
I sat on the comprehensive planning board, the agriculture committee, when they were doing it. I'm going to say this is more than 10 years ago. And we presented with this urban growth plan that I was presented with 3 years ago that came up. I've still never seen this urban city center that they're talking about. So I think I am actually agree with Tim. I think that's the way, that's the mindset of maybe this millennial generation that's coming forward. But is there going to be an urban city center here in Osceola County in the next 4 years? I doubt it.
Celebration.
There might be one on the way, and we may get closer to where it's at. But taking this snapshot right now is it's what I think, in my opinion, is what we need to do.
Well, I mean, clearly it was
do it
time
right.
to update the study, even though
Yeah,
they've only been 3
absolutely,
years.
obviously.
There are some districts who choose not to do that over a period of time. I was interested to see that St. John's is finishing up theirs now, and they had done it in 2014 as well. They're looking at it now. So I think that makes sense. Clearly, we've heard you say that we want more categories to start with, and then you may potentially narrow them. But I think what I've also heard, to address your point about the truth, is that we can, even if we decide to condense some of the categories, or the county condenses categories more, we still will have more accurate information to provide to folks at the planning commission.
To be able to,
Right.
and
About
those
real
decisions
student
need to be
generation
made.
rates.
Those decisions need to be made very carefully going forward. I mean, I don't live in Poinciana, but I've had people tell me that they can't get to a meeting in an hour.
Right.
In Kissimmee, because they live in Poinciana. Now, to me, those are big issues for a community that can begin to devalue pride. Tim's going to know more about this, being from the real estate side than me, but I mean, I can tell you anecdotally that I would never live in a community that took me an hour to get out of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'd live in the woods where it'd take me 30 minutes to get to town, which is where I do live.
But at least it's pretty.
But if I'm going to have to sit in traffic for an hour, I mean, to me, and I believe, and this is just me and it's my opinion, that values are not only, that values are going to decrease in a way, maybe not. And this
No, you're right. You're going down the right road.
Yeah. But as inflation goes up, that you know what I'm saying. Not to get too deep economics, but
The Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford Metropolitan Service Area, in 2015 had 2 million people in it approximately. The projection is by 2040, in 25 years from 2015, we'll have 3 million. Of that, Osceola County is expected to grow by 120%. So we had about 350,000 in 2015. That means we're going to grow by almost another 420,000 in the next 25 years. That's going to put us over 800,000 people here. If it takes an hour to get from Poinciana to here now, it's going to take 2 days.
I just want to do, this is my hometown.
Just move to the other expensive item, transportation.
Well,
and I have some problems with the county, the way they've handled that situation. So,
and the Seminole's got 1,000 acres in urban growth boundaries. Y'all remember me say it all the time. Orange County's got 10,000. We have 100,000. I can tell you, I don't know who saw the news within the last month. Amazon's going to build a distribution center in Lake Nona area. They're going to have 1,500 employees. The average salary is about $12 an hour or something. Where do you think they're going to live? They're not going to live in Lake Nona.
No, they're going to live in a low-income apartment being built in Narcoossee at this moment.
Yes.
And that's an issue for us.
That's a huge issue. The doctors in Lake Nona,
I hope
City
not.
are staying there, and the lower income people.
And that's the thing, if affordable housing, if it costs double what a family, I'm all day, I'm approving that. Or I would vote for it.
Sure.
Because if it costs that much more to build those type of units to this community, I think we've got to look at those things and we've got to address those issues. If we're going to double in size, let's double in size in a smart way, not just double in size by just building 300. We need those balance. We need a balance of affordable housing, middle income housing, high income. I'm all for it, but let's do it.
We cannot just be the affordable housing community.
We cannot be an affordable housing.
There's a new word out, they don't use the word, it's housing that's affordable. Sounds so much better to everybody.
But affordable housing, I get the big difference
Housing
there.
that's affordable.
Look, let's do it right. I'm all for doing it right. I want this community to do it right. Because if I'm going to live here the rest of my life, I don't want it to take me an hour to get from Canoe Creek to St. Cloud.
I want to live here the rest of my life. And these are the things that scare me. I may not be able to.
Are there other questions, concerns, and direction that you want to provide to
Let me kick my
to
soapbox.
us or to our partners as we move forward?
We got a lot of good items that y'all given us to look at, and I think we're going to provide you with a lot of good information to review.
Good.
That's what we want. And I appreciate you guys taking the time and coming here. And I know Rhonda reached out to you, I think, and had some questions that I had. And so I appreciate you addressing those. So thank you.
The only other comment I'll make, at least I'm aware of at the moment, is, and I made this comment a couple years ago when we went through this process, is I absolutely want us to go about things right, but I want us to be very aware. And maybe you'll disagree with me a little bit, Jay, with your point on Mr. Lentz earlier. People do make decisions based upon where they're going to develop, based upon the cost of development.
Mm-hmm.
And these are hard costs that do not go away. And if the market cannot bear what the overall price of the product is going to be because the costs that are embedded in development are so high, it does have an adverse impact on us as well.
I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah, and I can tell you, and we'll use Poinciana example.
No, I agree.
Education impact fee over $10,000, Osceola County. You go one block over, you're in Polk County in Poinciana. You have just under $6,000 that you're paying there, right about $6,000. I'm selling more land in Poinciana on Polk County side, Poinciana on Polk County side than I am Osceola, solely because of the education impact fees. And we may argue, well, that's okay for now, and that's fine. I'm not upset about that one way or the other, but I'm just letting you know that when we think about the economic viability of our community and we understand the impact that slow growth and development also had on us economically in this county, we want to make sure that we're being very wise and prudent about how we go about making these decisions, because you go too far too fast, you increase the cost of doing business too much in this community, you end up creating the exact opposite effect. And we're talking about raising dollars to keep up with growth, And ultimately, what we have the potential of doing is raising dollars so much that we won't even have growth.
I disagree.
Well,
But if you have an economy
That's
built
fine, but
solely
you don't
on
live-
residential
you don't
growth,
live in
you
my
really,
world.
that's very, very scary. We've already seen that's not the right way to build a community, is having an economy built solely on residential growth is very dangerous.
I agree.
And I know what we're doing across the street over here, and that's trying to address that. So.
I agree with you, but
Yeah.
it's all a function of income, which derives how much people can afford, which is how much house they will build, which is what the market can bear, which is where these numbers end up getting compressed. And that's just what we need to be aware of. I'm not saying
We
that
gotta
should-
find the balance.
Yeah,
Agree,
find the
and
balance.
that's-
There is a balance, I don't know what it is,
Exactly.
but there
The
is a
Metro
balance.
Orlando
we
market
can't
is
take
going to
everybody
grow.
at a
And this is the
loss.
only place that can really grow right now.
But to that
So
point,
it's
if
not
we have
gonna-
homes over
so it's- it's
500,000
gonna
square
complement what we
foot,
do.
Tim, then we're going to have such a low impact fee on, maybe those are the homes that are going to be built. That's what I'm saying.
Let's build them.
Let's build them. If we're, but if we're going to have an impact of a 300 unit apartment, that impact may be $20,000 or $30,000. You know what? I'm for saying, you know what? Let's slow our roll on that a little bit, because we can't absorb that many people with the infrastructure we have, not only transportation, but in schools. We just can't absorb it that fast, no matter whether, just because a construction company is getting paid to do that, and he pays his employees and all that, that's fine, but that's not the way that we can build a healthy economy in Osceola
Here's a
County.
question.
Because then we're left with 300 kids, not enough transportation.
Here's a question nobody
I
asked.
actually fully agree with you.
Yeah. And that's where I'm coming from.
Between
No, and I
2000
agree that we've got to develop correctly.
Between 2014 and now, can you share with us what the cost, based on either the real cost or what the state says, of an elementary student station was in 14 to now, a middle school student
They got
station
it.
from 14? Where was it on here?
It was,
But
they
he's
had a
asking-
graph in here. You were too busy
Oh,
trying to
yeah.
ask a question. Right here, page 6.
Sending pictures to Larry Walker.
Yeah, page 6.
Page 6. Okay, so, this is K-12.
That's statewide.
That's, yeah, combined.
I would like to see what the elementary, 14 to 17, the middle school, 14 to 17, and high school, 14 to 17.
Statewide.
So we can give you what we have. The issue
Well, the
is.
DOE sets those numbers.
Yeah, we have DOE numbers, and I can actually give you those, but they are sort of artificial in that it's a set % increase over time. It's not
So
against
I
construction.
mean, again, we mix two things, and we do a lot of master planning and try to estimate 5 years versus impact fees. And each county is so different in terms of what they're doing with their prototypes.
That's why I'm asking for a DOE number.
Yeah, I don't know if DOE
Yeah,
actually.
DOE numbers are right here.
Are
I
they
can-
just not inflated, or are they
but
actual numbers?
No, they just take 2006 and inflate by a set percent.
Look,
so
we just made
it's
an
not-
estimate on what it was going to take to build a middle school, and just blew that up.
No,
I mean,
no.
by over 20%.
So our cost of school is
Construction costs right now.
20% higher per student station than what the state says it should be?
No.
No, I'm just
No,
telling
okay,
you.
RGFP.
When we originally
I didn't think so.
budgeted for our middle school, what the construction company came back with, and what I guess our research from our financial and facilities team came back with, was that actually, no, this is correct. that
No,
it's-
I understand that, but I want to know what the DOE difference
So this
is.
is actually more like this, Jay.
Construction costs are escalating because of
It's more
demand.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Because we're
Okay.
still below, I think, the DOE.
cost of elementary, middle, yeah, so.
If you want to email that to us.
Yeah, we
Yes,
can-
I will
we
email
can
it. It's
email
a whole
also
chart
maybe
by,
do
Yeah.
so you can see by month and what they are.
Well, I'd just
projecting.
like to see
Yeah.
14
Trends.
elementary, 17 elementary, 14 middle school, 17 middle
You're on the right
school,
track.
14 high school, 17 high school, so it gives us some perspective. We typically build our student stations for less than that, but again, I think that gives us some perspective that we really don't. I saw the chart, but I think we need to see it in black and white, those specific numbers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Vice
Yeah,
Chair,
the-
you're in charge.
Oh, whoa, hey, no. No, I just want to say, not to go back to just not to harp on 7069 with the capital funding, but I mean, that's why we've seen some of these counties, I believe, support the capital funding for their charter schools, because heck, like Collier County, we've borrowed money from them in the past for capital because they don't need it. And then they have the ability to spend extravagantly, where we're, and to Tim's point, where we're being fiscally responsible, now we're being punished.
Penalized.
And certainly, that goes to the construction costs. So their construction costs, from the numbers I saw, are a lot higher per square foot
Yes.
than our construction costs.
You've been extremely efficient, and even the builders who work in this area, for example, you, Volusia, et cetera, they say it's simpler. Like, for example, Volusia County has site issues, they have to.
Right, sinkholes.
Yeah, so, right. So there's everything in Osceola County makes it easier to build, is what they were saying us, and that's what always been, like, all your studies, you were always on the low end.
But
as
this
far
is a
as
story,
cost.
I think, when those people come forward and we start addressing these numbers that you're gonna bring forward, that's the kind of things we need to explain to people. Look, not only, this number may seem high to you, but actually, it could be a lot higher if we weren't as fiscally responsible as a board as we are. So,
We're not fiscally responsible, we just don't need money.
Dr. Pace, do you have anything else you want to add?
I do not.
Both.
Mr. Thacker?
We are, yeah.
Mr. Weishager?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wheeler?
I'm good, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Perry? Thank you for being here, filling in for a much more affable character than Mr. Krumpenbacher was.
There's only one Frank Rappenbach.
Well put.
Sarah, you haven't said anything. Is there anything you'd like to say?
I'm good. I think we have our direction.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you all very
Thank you
much.
all.
Yes.
So we will adjourn this workshop.
Off the record, Tommy Tompkins has sent a letter